¿Cuál sobre nosotros? ¿Cuál? ¿Cuál? ¿Cómo llamáis vosotros?
Antonio, ¿cuál es vuestro equipo?
A veces
Buenas tardes. Bien, pues, bienvenidos a todos a la Universidad de Almería. Bienvenidos a esta sala de grado del edificio departamental de Ciencias Empresariales, Económicas y Ciencias Empresariales, donde nos toca hoy presentar a una figura absolutamente relevante en la ciencia del siglo XXI. Estamos muy orgullosos en la Universidad de Almería de poder contar hoy con la presencia de Kip Thorne. Ayer tuvimos un día maravilloso con Kip aquí en la universidad. Por si alguien, bueno, me imagino que todos lo conocéis, pero voy a hacer una muy breve semblanza de Kip Thorne. Es, como bien sabéis, un físico teórico estadounidense que es conocido mundialmente por sus significativas contribuciones a la teoría de la relatividad general, la astrofísica y la física gravitacional. Las investigaciones de Kip, como le gusta que le llamen, dice que el profesor Thorne es su padre, él le prefiere el nombre de Kip, han abarcado una amplia gama de temas dentro de la relatividad general, incluyendo la naturaleza de los agujeros negros y las ondas gravitacionales. Con Stephen Hawking teorizó sobre las singularidades dentro de los agujeros negros y mantuvo un famoso debate sobre la viabilidad de viajar en el tiempo. Una de sus contribuciones más significativas ha sido su trabajo pionero en la detección de ondas gravitacionales. Kip fue uno de los fundadores del proyecto Ligo y su incansable labor durante décadas fue fundamental para la primera detección directa de ondas gravitacionales en 2015. Este logro, que fue realmente un logro histórico para la ciencia, confirmó una predicción clave de la teoría de la relatividad general de Einstein y abrió una nueva ventana al universo. En 2017, Kip, junto con Weis y Barish, fue galardonado con el Premio Nobel de Física por su contribución decisiva al detector Ligo y la observación de ondas gravitacionales. Meses antes, en el mismo año, también fue galardonado con el Premio Princesa de Asturias, en España. Sin embargo, podemos decir que la influencia de Thorne trasciende al ámbito puramente científico. Ha demostrado un profundo compromiso con la divulgación de la ciencia al público general, convirtiéndose en un puente fascinante entre los complejos conceptos de la física moderna y la comprensión popular. Kip llevó su pasión por la ciencia al mundo del cine de una manera absolutamente excepcional, como tuvimos la gran oportunidad de comprobar ayer, durante la proyección de la película, así como con el coloquio que tuvimos posterior sobre la ciencia que hay dentro de esta película, ¿no? Fue el productor ejecutivo y asesor científico de Interstellar, dirigida por Christopher Nolan. Su participación, como bien vimos ayer, fue crucial para asegurar una precisión científica de la representación de los agujeros negros, los agujeros de gusano y los efectos de la dilatación del tiempo. Publicó casi al mismo tiempo que la película el libro The Science of Interstellar, explicando en detalle la física detrás de los fenómenos mostrados en la pantalla y separando la ciencia de la ficción. Por tanto, además de tener un fuerte impacto en la física teórica a través de sus revolucionarias investigaciones, Kip Thorne ha demostrado un compromiso excepcional con la divulgación científica. Su capacidad para comunicar la belleza y la complejidad del universo de una manera accesible y atractiva lo convierten en una figura inspiradora tanto para la comunidad científica como para el público en general. Hoy tenemos la oportunidad de disfrutar de una charla titulada El papel de la física en el desarrollo de la ciencia, la ingeniería y la tecnología. Esta charla, que es más académica que el acto que tuvimos ayer de proyección de la película y comentarios posteriores sobre la física y los detalles de la película, es un mensaje también inspirador para toda la comunidad científica de la Universidad de Almería, especialmente para el futuro grado en física que vamos a estrenar el próximo septiembre, un grado en física conjunto con la Universidad de Huelva, y en el que Kip Thorne ha tenido el enorme detalle de dedicarnos unas palabras, un texto de deseo de éxito a la titulación. También ayer inauguró una placa en la Facultad de Ciencias Experimentales y os voy simplemente a leer, para terminar esta brevísima intervención, las palabras de Thorne. Deseo todo lo mejor a la Universidad de Almería al lanzar su nuevo grado en física. Anticipo que este programa será una inspiración a las futuras generaciones de estudiantes a explorar en el universo con curiosidad y ampliar las fronteras de nuestro conocimiento, y les inspirará a crear y a perfeccionar nuevas aplicaciones de la física en beneficio de la humanidad. Muchísimas gracias por vuestra atención, y ahora ya os dejo con realmente el protagonista, que estoy un pelín nervioso, del día, porque es realmente fascinante estar a su lado con todos vosotros, Kip Thorne.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? I'm going to address my remarks largely to students and staff, faculty, and others who have some background, or who are working in or who want to work in science or engineering or technology. These things are all closely connected to physics, and my basic message today is that the laws of physics underpin in major ways all of science, engineering, and technology. And I'm going to describe that in the early part of my talk today by examples from my own personal experience. So when I was a child, I wanted to be a snowplow driver. I grew up in the Rocky Mountains in the United States at high altitude, where the snowplow made snow drifts that were 3 times higher than my father was tall. And it was clear that a snowplow driver was the most powerful person in the universe. But when I got a little older, at age 8, in 1948, my mother took me to a lecture about the solar system, and I fell in love with the idea of the solar system, and she helped me understand the great distances between the planets compared to the sizes of the planets. And I started reading avidly everything that I could find about the solar system. But then in 1953, I found in the big city near me, I was growing up in Logan, Utah, in Salt Lake City, I found a used copy of the book 1, 2, 3 Infinity by George Gamow, who was a Russian emigre to the United States, and a cosmologist, a physicist who studied things in the cosmos. And from that book, I learned that there are things called the laws of physics, and that those laws of physics control the universe. And so it became obvious to me that what I wanted to do was be a physicist and come to understand how the laws of physics control the universe. So that has been my career and my aspiration since age 13 in 1953. And I have seen enormous progress by humanity in coming to understand how the laws of physics work and how they do control the universe. In fact, physics underpins engineering, science, and technology, as I said. I've seen this in my own career. I'm just going to talk about this in a few words without slides. The earliest thing I did was right after high school, before I entered university, and during the summers, for several summers, I worked as an assistant to engineers designing solid propellant rocket engines. And I learned about the flow of gas inside a rocket engine and through a nozzle. And in these rocket engines, I was working for Thiokol Chemical Corporation, we kept blowing up these engines. They would explode because turbulence in the gas as it was going toward and through the nozzle was eating away the material that was protecting the steel casing of the rocket engine. from the flame of the fire that was going on in there. And I came to understand the understanding turbulence was a very difficult problem in physics and a very interesting problem in physics. I then, a few years later, when I went to graduate school, I was planning to be a theoretical physicist. But I knew I wanted to work and trying to understand what I now call the warp side of the universe, objects and phenomena made from warp space-time. And I knew that there were very few observations as yet, but the technology was bringing us to a point where we would be able to begin to make observations of things such as black holes and the birth of the universe. And so I decided I needed to understand experiment. And so I spent a year working on a nuclear physics experiment just to get experience in the laboratory. So one of my 3 years as a PhD student was spent as an experimenter. And I was a member of a theory research group, but I also went every week to a meeting, a discussion meeting of an experimental research group led by Robert Dicke, who was a great experimental physicist who laid the foundations for experiments to test Einstein's laws of relativity in that era. So I got exposed to all of these things. When I moved to Caltech, I learned how important applied mathematics was, and I'll comment on that in a few minutes. And I started to pay attention to mathematics because it was so crucial for the kinds of physics I wanted to do. And I also then began to explore the possibility of working on gravitational wave physics and the attempts to discover gravitational waves. And that project, the Ligo project that I worked on, was so complex that it required bringing together tools from almost all areas of science and technology and physics, material science. It became a wonderful opportunity to train students broadly in physics. I also, toward the end of my career, together with Roger Blandford, a superb astrophysicist, I wrote a textbook called Modern Classical Physics. And we broke that, it's a big, giant textbook, and we broke it into 5 pieces. So statistical physics, optics, elasticity and fluid dynamics, plasma physics, and relativity and cosmology. So covering all of the major areas of classical physics except elementary electromagnetism and thermodynamics. And this was interesting for me because in all of these areas, I had worked in these areas, but not deeply. They had all played a role in my personal research. And then to create a textbook that described the top of these areas was something that was very educational for me, but particularly interesting was that we found applications from a huge range of engineering, science, and technology to go into this textbook. And I want to give you a few examples that illustrate the power of physics beyond the usual areas that at least theoretical physicists like me, beyond the usual areas that we think about. So we use as an example the collapse of the World Trade Center in New York City when these airplanes were flown into the Twin Towers. We picked out not the Twin Towers, but another one where this was a much cleaner problem. And we use this as a clear example of a phenomenon called buckling in structural engineering. And buckling constrained by lateral forces of the horizontal floors in the building and bifurcations of equilibria for a few people who understand about that. In the mathematical area of catastrophe theory, which we applied to this problem in structural engineering. So we had structural engineering, we had mathematics, catastrophe theory, and all illustrating fundamental principles that grow out of physics. We talk about weather, tornadoes and water spouts, and vorticity and how vorticity controls these phenomena. In biology, we talk about propulsion. And so to make the problem simple, if you take a fish and it has its tail, it wags its tail in order to move it through the water. So we made a little problem where you could do the calculation very simply of just a cylinder is shown here, and the tail is a paddle, like my hand, it just wags back and forth, and you work out the theory how that drives the fish forward. Or another little model where we just have a cylinder and a corkscrew. And for very small objects like bacteria, they actually have corkscrew tails, some of them. And they just turn their corkscrew tails, and because they're so small, viscosity plays a huge role in the world that they live in. For the fish, viscosity is not very important because they're big objects. So the propulsion by a bacterium, turning its corkscrew tail, involves very different physics tied to viscosity from the physics of the fish wagging its tail. We talk about optical technology, the physics of a green laser pointer, where it's much easier to begin with red laser, and then you frequency double the red laser by sending it through what's called a nonlinear crystal to turn the red light into green light. And so we go through the technology of this phenomenon and the technology of nonlinear optics. Solitary waves, we do the example that you saw that some of you saw in the movie last night from the movie Interstellar, with a solitary wave that has this kind of a shape, but then you have two solitary waves that pass through each other and that have a nonlinear interaction with each other, but they retain their shapes after they pass through each other. A rather amazing kind of a phenomenon that solitons have. And so we discuss solitons in a variety of different areas of science and technology. So that just gives you some sense that for me, writing a textbook that pulls examples out of many different areas of science and technology, and it tries to inspire students to understand that they have an opportunity, if they are physicists, to work in these many different areas. This was important for me. When I was I'll get back to this in a moment. Let me just give you some sense again of the tie of physics to so many different areas by telling you about the current careers of the 53 physics PhD students that I've mentored over my career. Now, this was a long career. I was mentoring students for nearly 50 years, and 53 PhD students, a little more than one a year, getting their PhD with me. About 1/3 of them became physics professors, doing a lot of research. Basically, people like what I had been. So that's only 1/3 of them. Maybe 1/6 went into primarily physics education, with a much bigger focus on education than on research. So that's about half of my students. And the other half are an amazing mixture of careers. And 3 of them became professors of computer science or computational science. The difference is computer science deals with the fundamental concepts that underlie computing. Computational science deals with applying computer science to calculate things in fundamental physics or in applied physics or engineering or various areas of science. One of them became a professor of computational biology, Bill Press, who's at the University of Texas. One became a professor of biomedicine, focusing on physics of the heart. It's at the at Washington University in St. Louis, Chandra Kovacs. One became a professor of quantum information science. One became working at a very high level in a private company doing machine learning and artificial intelligence. What's going on here? One went into management consulting. Now this seems a little strange, but in fact, what physicists learn is how to analyze things. And if you understand how to take a problem and break it into small pieces and analyze it, then you have the tools to be a management consultant. Because that's what people doing management consulting do. They break up a problem into pieces and then they give advice on how to improve the management in your company. One became an analyst for the Central Intelligence Agency. I'm told a very high level analyst. I don't know what he has done, but the key thing is that for people at that level, their job is to take whatever data they can that the agency has been able to acquire and try to truly understand what it is the Russians are trying to do or the Chinese are trying to do in order to have wise decision making if you have a wise president. But this is really a crucial role in government, is to be able to take data, inadequate data in some cases, and analyze as best you can to figure out what's really going on in the world. One became a historian of science. He did a PhD in physics and the history of science, a joint PhD, Daniel Kennefit. And he is a member of the team that is doing, analyzing Albert Einstein's scientific papers, but he also has been the leader in this generation of doing the history of gravitational wave science, so Ligo, Lisa, and so forth. One became a writer, a poet, and a playwright, Alan Lightman. He even very early in his career wrote the talk of the town for the New Yorker, if any of you know the New Yorker magazine, which is, this is sort of viewed as high culture by people in New York City. But he's written a number of books of poems and plays and a lot of essays about science, and these things are normally tied to science. And in fact, this is the kind of thing I'm doing in my second career. I spent nearly a half a century being a conventional physicist, professor, physics professor, and now I'm working at the interface between science and the arts on things like the movie Interstellar, a book of poetry and paintings that I just published, my poetry and paintings by a colleague of mine, multimedia concerts that I have done with Brian May and other musicians, Hans Zimmer, basically trying to convey the essence of science through the media, and I'm having great fun at this. So all of these are the kinds of careers you can go into if you have good physics training. That's where my students and I have gone. I've learned some particularly interesting lessons from my students and colleagues and my grandfather. It begins with my grandfather in 1944, when I was 4 years old. He told me, if you find a job when you grow up that is like play, then you will succeed in life. I only understood that really clearly some years later, when I recognized that in order to do the kinds of things I wanted to do in terms of gravitational waves and exploring the warp side of the universe, I was going to need to work very, very hard. And if it wasn't fun, there was no way I was going to work hard enough to have success. And so it was crucial that I find things that were fun and that I really enjoyed. My granddaughter decided some years ago, maybe a decade ago, she's now 32, so that places my age. My granddaughter decided she was going to be a physicist, obviously because of me. My children didn't go anywhere near physics, basically, but she decided she'd be a physicist. And I told her she didn't love it enough, so she should use it as a starting point to move in some direction. I pointed out to her that she could move in any direction she wanted in science or technology or engineering, or even use it to move off in the interface with the arts. And so she should look for something that she really loved and do that, but after she mastered physics. She found a PhD thesis that she really loved, so I don't tell her that anymore. I really do believe strongly that what my grandfather said. John Wheeler, my PhD mentor, taught me the power and the crucial roles of physical intuition. In his case, in my case, Stephen Hawking's case, physical intuition based on mental pictures. If I'm trying to analyze a physics problem, trying to design a gravitational wave detector, or trying to understand what goes on when gas moves around a black hole, the answers for a theorist come from calculations with the laws of physics. Of course, you need observations to guide your calculations. But the calculations are awfully slow. You need to decide what to calculate. In order to decide what to calculate, you need physical intuition that tells you that probably if I calculate this, I'll get some payoff. I'll really learn something. That I'm less likely to learn something if I do that. So I need physical intuition. My physical intuition is based on mental pictures. And Stephen Hawking's is based on mental pictures. But Subramanian Chandrasekhar, a close friend of mine from East India, who got the Nobel Prize for understanding there's a maximum mass of white dwarfs, and stars that were heavier than that would likely collapse to form black holes. Chandra, his mind works very differently from Stephen's or mine. He has no mental pictures to carry around. He has very little physical intuition, but he had this amazing ability to take the mathematics and manipulate the mathematics to make the equations look beautiful. And by that process, he just made major discoveries. A completely different kind of a process from how I work. And I've never understood how he did this. He made major discoveries just by making the mathematics look beautiful. And so that was a lesson to me, and that has also been important to me in mentoring students, that people's minds work differently and different ways of thinking, different ways of approaching problems, different types of problems are better attuned to me than to some other student or other person whose mind works differently. William Burke, a graduate student of mine, we were trying to understand radiation reaction. When say two stars go around each other and emit gravitational waves, they lose energy, so they spiral together. So there must be some force that causes them to spiral together. And there had been enormous controversy over whether they really would spiral together. It was a problem in mathematical physics that there was huge controversy and misunderstanding about for several decades. And Bill was talking to people in applied mathematics, and who specialty was connected to fluid mechanics. He came to me and he said, you know, that when these people analyze boundary layers, is when the air flows over a wing, and there's a boundary layer right at the surface of the wing that interfaces between the wing and the bulk airflow. They have developed techniques, sometimes called singular perturbation theory, true-length scale expansions, various names for these techniques. He said, I think those techniques will enable us to understand radiation reaction. So we imported, thanks to Bill and talking with the applied mathematicians, we imported those techniques into general relativity theory, and we solved the problem of how does radiation reaction come about in gravitational waves. And this was what I advertised, the importance of being connected to mathematics and to other areas. People in other areas of science, technology, mathematics are likely to have tools that will be really valuable to you as a physicist. And so it's not a one-way street. Physics influences all these areas and gives tools in all these areas. These areas come back and give back to us. And we have, I and my students and colleagues have gotten a lot of insights, crucial insights from people in a variety of areas of science and technology and engineering. Weis, who invented the technique that we use searching for gravitational waves in Ligo, when I heard his technique that he was going to use light rays bouncing off of mirrors to search for gravitational waves, I thought he'd gone crazy, because the motion of the mirrors that you're trying to measure was 10 million times smaller than the individual atoms in the mirrors, and I couldn't believe it would ever be possible to measure the motion of a mirror that small. It took me 3 years to become convinced that this had a possibility to succeed. And then I grabbed hold of it and said, okay, I will help you and your experimental colleagues try to make this succeed. Once I saw that there really was a possibility of success, that was an unexpected opportunity. And the importance of watching for unexpected opportunities and thinking about them carefully and then grabbing them has been crucial to my success in science. I never intended to be involved in movies, but I had this blind date with a movie maker that gave rise in the end to Interstellar, and it was an unexpected opportunity. And so that's a piece of advice I'll often give to students. Yakov Borisovich Zeldovich, whom I will say a little bit more about in a moment, was a Russian physicist who taught me that if you work very hard to get to the heart of a problem, of a physical situation, you can often identify one or two central things that were controlling what goes on in that situation, and you can build a simple mathematical model or physical model that will enable you to move forward very rapidly in understanding this. And I'm going to give you an example from Zeldovich in a few minutes, but this power that he had to think in this way, which is a power that Feynman also had, another close friend of mine, was something I really took to heart. And finally, James Hardle, a dear friend of mine, I collaborated with him on a project that involved some very complicated calculations. And he said to me, as we were early in this project, he said, "You're wasting your time. You don't stop doing these calculations. Figure out whether the calculation is really needed before you do it." And he taught me how to scope out a problem before starting to calculate. So I want to spend the rest of my time today talking about the origins of radical new technologies that have arisen largely from physics or partially from physics, such as artificial intelligence, and the links to physics, the links to university-based research, such as what is going on here at the University of Almería or at Caltech. I want to begin by talking about artificial intelligence because it is so much in the news today and so promising and worrisome for the future. This begins, according to the Nobel Prize Committee, which gave John Hopfield the Nobel Prize for this work, began in the 1970s. John Hopfield was a Princeton physicist working in condensed matter physics. But he got interested in chemistry and biology, and in taking the tools that he was using, tools of statistical physics and nonlinear phenomena that he was learning, that he had mastered, that he had used in condensed matter physics, and applying them in chemistry and biology. And at Princeton, his colleagues were not terribly excited about him going off in these other directions, so he moved to Caltech. Sorry. Well, and so he moved to Caltech as a professor of chemistry and biology. At Caltech, we provided him access to a very large computer. And at Caltech, talking to the chemists and the biologists and to the physicists and using techniques that he had brought from physics, he pioneered the field of artificial neural networks. And he did his pioneering work largely based on insights that he got from the physics of magnetism. 1985, Jeffrey Hinton at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and colleagues adapted Hopfield's neural network techniques to create the field of machine learning. They basically created this field, and they created it by these neural network techniques of Hopfield and using insights from statistical physics. There followed several decades of university-based research until finally, something like 10 years ago, private industry, Google and so forth, adapted these machine learning techniques to large language models and gave rise to artificial intelligence. But the folks in industry, the entrepreneurs, had no interest in these techniques until they could see a profit in the near-term future. And so these techniques were conceived in universities. They were developed in universities for several decades, and only after that did they get sufficiently mature that the folks in industry took notice and jumped in and started using them. For their pioneering work in this, this should have been the 2024 Physics Nobel Prize, went to Hopfield and to Hinton. And the story of this Foundations for Artificial Intelligence is told by the Nobel Prize Committee in connection with that prize. This has also been true, basically the same story in biomedical technology. The technologies that are really the true 21st century technologies, they're just taking off today, biomedical, material science, and quantum technologies. And I want to focus on the quantum technologies in just a moment. It's the same as AI. The foundations were conceived in universities. I don't know what's wrong here. Let me see. So I'll let you try to read it from here since I'm having trouble with the animations. Well, let me try one more time. The foundations were conceived in universities. There were several decades of intense R&D in universities. And then when they were sufficiently mature that near-term profits could be seen, then and only then did private industry become interested and start investing millions and billions of dollars. That's true in all of these areas. And these are the areas that are the hot areas that have made the United States be the leader that it is in high technology today. And that are central to the future. Let me now talk specifically about quantum technologies. By this I mean quantum computing, quantum cryptography, and quantum precision measurement. I want to show you in some detail how these grew out of, in fact, issues that we were struggling with in Ligo. So let me begin with the concept of vacuum fluctuations. And so I'm going to talk about some quantum physics in the context of the cosmos. And then I'll come to in the context of technology. And because this is the sort of the way that it went historically. Yakov Borisovich Zeldovich was the person in the old Soviet Union who taught me and Stephen Hawking about vacuum fluctuations. If you take a box and you remove from it everything you possibly can remove, because of the nature of quantum mechanics, you're left with fluctuations of everything that possibly could have been in the box, fluctuating in and out of existence. You have electrons and protons and neutrons and photons, all the fundamental particles. I can even say that you have Kip Thorne fluctuating in and out of existence with extremely small probabilities. But everything that possibly could have existed inside that box is fluctuating in and out of existence. And these fluctuations have no energy for all practical purposes, for our purposes, and it produce no gravity. This is due to what in quantum field theory is called renormalization. So I'm going to now give you something that I normally do in paintings and in verse, but I'm going to do it in prose and paintings. The paintings are by my collaborator, Leah Halloran, who's a marvelous painter. She's good enough that she's had one-woman shows at the Guggenheim here in Spain. Just a remarkable woman. And so in September 1973, in the Hotel Rossiya in Moscow, I had taken Stephen Hawking to Moscow at the invitation of Yakov Borisovich Zeldovich, shown here on the right. And he and his student Alexei Starobinsky met with Stephen Hawking and me. Now, Zeldovich is an interesting person. He, together with Andrei Sakharov, had been the inventor of the Russian hydrogen bomb. For those who know anything about the history of that, the key idea for how you make a bomb that is so powerful that it's basically as powerful as you might want to make it. There's no limit on how powerful it can be. The idea in the United States came from Teller and Oolong. And just a few months later, it was discovered independently by Zeldovich and Sakharov. This was a period when the Russians were really frightened of the United States. If the United States had such a weapon, and they did not, they were afraid that the United States would use a preemptive nuclear attack to destroy the cities, big cities in the Soviet Union, and wipe Russia out. And indeed, the head of the strategic wing of the Air Force was advocating this, and President Eisenhower stopped him. But there really was a move in the U.S. to do that. And so it wasn't crazy that Zeldovich and Sakharov, although they knew the failings of the society they were living in, which I can describe in this way, that Zeldovich invited me to Moscow for the first time in 1978. And he met me at the airport, because he knew some of my research. He met me at the airport. He took me for a walk in the woods, far from all bugs. And he said to me, "You must understand that today the Soviet Union is a wonderful place to live because my friends no longer disappear in the middle of the night, never to be seen again." And I never imagined that I would have to fear such a thing in the United States, but we do today with Donald Trump. And it is a real issue. Anyway, so Zeldovich then was a very interesting, remarkable person. And he told us, together with Starobinsky, the following. Suppose you have a spinning black hole, and this spinning black hole drags space into a whirling motion around itself, and that whirling motion involves basically a differential rotation of space around the black hole. The technical phrase we use for this is dragging of inertial frames. And so these vacuum fluctuations coming in from all directions, but Leah here paints it just coming in from the left. The vacuum fluctuations have great appetites. They swallow up energy from the spin of space, and they use that energy to convert themselves into real particles. Those real particles go flying away out into the universe as what we now call out into the universe. And basically what we see then, observe, because we don't notice vacuum fluctuations, is that a spinning black hole will radiate particles. Stephen Hawking took that idea and went home and thought about it very deeply. And he realized that even a non-spinning black hole can radiate. He said a non-spinning black hole is created by the implosion of a star. As the star shrinks, the black hole is formed in the center of the star, shown here by that black dot. And it grows as the star expands, and it grows to swallow the star. And during that expansion of space, vacuum fluctuations flow in to near the horizon of the black hole where space is expanding. They suck energy out of the expanding space and turn themselves into real particles. Those real particles go flying off. And this is what Hawking predicted, this Hawking radiation. And even a million times years later, there is still a little bit of this Hawking radiation flying off from that black hole. So the discovery of Hawking radiation, which completely changed our understanding of black holes, came from Zeldovich and the issue of vacuum fluctuations. In 1971, Zeldovich also asked what role did vacuum fluctuations play in the birth of the universe? And he could not work things out and find any really good role. But two of his students, Andrei Starobinsky, well, one of his students and a very young colleague, Andrei Linde in Moscow, and then Alan Guth at Harvard and others, took that idea and on the basis of it, developed the theory of the inflationary expansion of the universe in 1979-80, in which they postulated that Big Bang singularity, the birth of the universe, produced only vacuum fluctuation. It produced the absolute minimum it possibly could have produced. But they then fed off the energy of the rapidly expanding space at the birth of the universe. And sucking the energy out, they created all of the particles and all of the radiation that we see in the universe today. As Hawking and others also discovered, they also created them with just the right amount of fluctuations to form the galaxies and that we see in the universe today. So that was quite a remarkable discovery. So at the same time as this work was being done, and I was very familiar with this, I was commuting to Moscow every year, and these ideas were floating around then my research group. At Caltech and MIT, my colleagues and I were laying the foundations for LIGO. This is a simplified model of LIGO. It's just what I need to explain the birth of quantum technology that came out of this. So in LIGO then we have, in the simplified model, we have a laser that produces a light beam that gets split in two at this beam splitter. The light goes down to the mirrors, and it comes back and gets recombined in the beam splitter. And I want to show you the light traveling out of the laser and down to the beam splitter, split in two. You follow the light. These are the oscillations of the light. They bounce off the mirror, come back. The light beams recombine. And if the arm lengths are identically the same, then the light cancels out going in this direction. There's no signal at all. And if a gravitational wave moves the mirrors back and forth, stretching on one arm while squeezing on the other, then the light oscillates at this output port, and you have an oscillating intensity in this photodetector. And that's basically how LIGO works. It's much more complicated than that, but that's the fundamental principle. Now, in LIGO, we have 40-kilogram mirrors, and this is a painting of one of the mirrors. It looks a little strange with all of this speckle, but a really good mirror reflects the light of anything in the vicinity, and so you're just seeing the reflections of the various things that were in the laboratory in the vicinity, and there is a painting by my colleague Leah Halloran. Now, Vladimir Babinsky in 1968, again, another Russian. The key foundations for the things that I'm talking about all did come from Russia, if you go back to the very beginning. 1968, this is way back when I was just starting my own career. He said that whatever method we use to search for gravitational waves, we will have to deal ultimately with quantum fluctuations of human-sized objects. And in this case of LIGO, it's the mirrors, quantum fluctuations of the mirrors. And so I formed a collaboration, a tight collaboration between my research group and Babinsky's research group in the mid-1970s. And these foundations that I'm talking about came out from that collaboration. He told us already in 1968 that we will have to invent quantum non-demolition technology, he called it. That is something, so if you want to see a gravitational wave, you have to prevent the quantum fluctuations of the mirrors from destroying the gravitational wave information as the gravitational wave information comes in. Nowadays, we use a different name, and this is called quantum precision measurement technology. Precision measurements made using quantum mechanical techniques. And I'm talking about then the birth of quantum precision measurement technology. It was Carlton Caves who pointed out that there are two quantum noises in LIGO. I guess we knew this. It was Caves who then explained this. There are two quantum noises in LIGO. First of all, there's the mirror's quantum jiggle, and you just saw the mirror jiggle. It's just random fluctuations in the position of the mirror because just like any other object, it can't be absolutely still. It will always fluctuate in quantum mechanics. And there is a quantum flutter and intensity oscillations of the output beam that's carrying the information to the photodetector. And this light beam's quantum flutter, well, let me back up. The mirror's quantum jiggle produces this mirror noise, and the light beam's quantum flutter, here you see it fluttering, produces what I'll call shot noise. Shot noise in a photodetector is a standard issue. It's that the photons are arriving not completely regularly, but with some randomness, a Poisson distribution of randomness. And so we have shot noise due to the quantum properties of the light. We have mirror noise in the photodetector due to the mirror's quantum jiggle. And it was Brzezinski pointed out we had to deal with these, both of these. But it was Carlton Caves, a student of mine. And some of the greatest work in my research group was done by students. He was just completing his PhD in 1981. And he had a brilliant insight. He realized that the physicists working on LIGO, and LIGO was just being planned, but they were expecting to isolate the mirrors and the output beam from all external influences. So the only thing that would influence it would be the gravitational waves that would stretch one arm of this gravity wave detector and squeeze the other arm of the gravity wave detector. Nothing else could influence it. And so that is part of why LIGO in the end cost $1 billion and took 1,000 people, was isolating the mirrors, isolating the beam in the presence of all huge numbers of ways that the external universe environment could influence them. And so he said there's something else that can interact with them. Vacuum fluctuations that come from the vicinity of the photodetector, the output beam here. These vacuum fluctuations, he pointed out, will go in, they'll get split in two in the beam splitter. They will go down and they will push on the mirrors, and they will push on this mirror with an increased push and a decreased push there, then an increased here, decreased there. And as the pushes are going to be anti-correlated between the two arms, the same way as a gravity wave is. A gravity wave stretches one arm while it squeezes the other arm. The vacuum fluctuations beating against the laser light produce a light pressure. And the light pressure will fluctuate up in one arm and it's fluctuating down in another arm because the vacuum fluctuations came from here instead of from the laser. There are vacuum fluctuations that accompany the laser, but they push, beating against the laser light, they push up on this and up on that, down on this and down on that. So they don't mimic a gravity wave. So the key thing, he said, is these vacuum fluctuations coming from the photodetector that will produce then, and in fact control the mirror's quantum jiggle. The mirror's not interacting with anything else. The quantum state of those vacuum fluctuations will control the quantum state of the mirrors. And that's remarkable. That means you have in your hands a way of controlling the quantum state of the mirrors and their quantum jiggle. And correspondingly, the vacuum fluctuations will go in and they'll return, and they will control the quantum state of the light's quantum flutter. That means they will also control the shot noise and the mirror noise. This one thing, the vacuum fluctuations. And that was a tremendous insight, and it was something perhaps that came from being immersed in a research group where the idea of vacuum fluctuations in cosmology was going on. I'm not sure. It may have been from the fact that we did a lot of talking with Richard Feynman in that period, and he was thinking a lot about quantum things. But anyway, this was Cave's enormous insight, and for which I think Caves deserves a Nobel Prize at some point. And Caves then said, we can control those vacuum fluctuations by squeezing them. And so let me explain this business of squeezing. Now I'm going to get a little bit technical. So for those who know about harmonic oscillators, things that oscillate, the vacuum fluctuations are actually can be described mathematically by two amplitudes, an E1 amplitude and an E2 amplitude for the electric field of the vacuum fluctuation. And they are side bands of the laser frequency. So you have a cosine of omega, the laser frequency times time. And then this is a side band that goes as cosine of the gravity wave frequency times time, and E2 times the sine of the gravity wave frequency times time. So these are basically the amplitudes of two quadratures of the vacuum fluctuations at each frequency. And these two quadratures are like position and momentum in quantum mechanics. They don't commute. There's an uncertainty principle between them. There you have inevitably a half a quantum of energy in these vacuum fluctuations. And normally in the normal vacuum, you have just as much fluctuations in each of the two, in each of these two quadratures. And so the noise is this little circle in here, little circle in this space where basically amplitude is going out and phase is going around. And so you can squeeze at the phase corresponding to E1 and squeeze at the phase corresponding to E2. So it turns out that this phase produces mirror noise and that phase produces shot noise. And so Caves understood not only that the vacuum fluctuations are a way to control the quantum fluctuations of the mirrors and of the light beam, quantum states of the mirrors and light beam. He understood what pieces of the vacuum fluctuations control each, and that there is an uncertainty principle between the two noises. And he was able then to compute, if you have a certain amount of light power bouncing off the mirrors, compute what the noise is. And so you have the mirror noise, it rises at low frequencies over here to the left, and shot noise rises at high frequencies over to the right. Down here is the gravity wave frequency, 10 hertz, 100 hertz, 1,000 hertz. And there's a quantum limit. There's no way with the vacuum fluctuations there that you can go below this red line. I told you I was going to get a little technical, but I think for a number of people, some people in the audience, this I hope is clear. Caves said, look, up here where the shot noise is dominant, I'm going to squeeze the vacuum fluctuations so they look like that. I increase the fluctuations of the mirror noise and decrease those of the shot noise. And down at low gravity wave frequencies, I'll squeeze like that. I will squeeze the mirror noise, and I will increase inevitably the shot noise. And he had not gone further, but a colleague of his who, hearing this idea, Bill Unruh in Canada, realized, okay, but there's a special angle you can squeeze in between. If you squeeze it in between just that right angle, then squeezing in between at an angle, it rotates as you go from high gravity wave frequency to low gravity wave frequency. If you can do that, he did a calculation and discovered, much to all our surprises, that the two noises would cancel each other completely. You could make the shot noise and the mirror noise cancel each other. The quantum noise was gone, and you're unaffected by it. If you had enough laser power, you're unaffected by it. And you could just happily move along and just ignore these quantum fluctuations. Basically, you were shoving the quantum noise into directions that were not influencing your gravity wave measurements. And you're doing it by manipulating the quantum state of the light, manipulating the quantum state of the mirrors, which you achieve by manipulating the quantum state of the vacuum fluctuations. And so this was the first quantum technology idea that anyone had. And it was a powerful idea. And this is 1981-82. It's called frequency-dependent squeezing. Same year, 1982, Feynman, who we were talking with extensively. When I had ideas in this area, I would go talk to Feynman and run them past him because he was the best person to tear you apart if you were wrong. Feynman was in parallel starting to think about quantum computing and realized that you could build a computer based on quantum logic as opposed to classical logic. He gave a famous lecture in that same year on what quantum computers could do, and that is regarded as the beginning of quantum computing. This is all coming out of Caltech, as did AI, Caltech is a very special place. John Hopfield, Feynman, Caves. And so this was the beginning of quantum computing simultaneous with the beginning of quantum precision measurement. So Caves told us what you needed to do. You had to do frequency-dependent squeezing. Jeff Kimball, who was down the hall from Caves at Caltech, he invented the technology to do this. It's called nonlinear optics. It's a parametric down conversion in a nonlinear crystal, which I'm not going to say anything more than the buzzwords. And then the Ligo team spent 30 years perfecting the technology, 30 years. The 1990s, 2000, the 2010s. And this is now operating in LIGO and is responsible for the ability of LIGO today to see several black hole collisions every week, compared to one every 6 weeks when LIGO first turned on. Quantum precision measurement is just absolutely crucial to what LIGO is now doing. It's mature, it's in place. At Caltech, we're building a Ginsberg Center for Quantum Precision Measurement. It's under construction, in it there is going to be all this LIGO-related work, but also quantum precision measurement technology being developed for atoms and molecules and nanotechnology. But that's not just at Caltech. There are a number of private companies that are now doing this under often under the name quantum sensing, because this is mature enough. They've seen success in LIGO in particular. It's mature enough that private industry is interested. They're spending millions of dollars to bring it to a point where they can make big profits. And so I think that's the last thing I wanted to say. I want to just conclude by saying how exciting it has been to have a career in which I could work with superb students like Carlton Caves and the others that I've mentioned. And we could use physics to lay foundations for future technologies. We also could have the fun of working sometimes as engineers. Sometimes I worked occasionally as a geophysicist. I won't go into details. Work in a variety of different areas of physics and engineering and science, and have a huge amount of fun. It's just been a great way to live, and I encourage those of you who are going into science, engineering, or technology. It is really a remarkable kind of a life to live, and remarkable things you can do. But I do recommend that you look at things broadly, not just narrowly, and look for opportunities in other directions than what you might be thinking about at the time, and look at bringing in tools from other directions. Don't just focus on strictly on your own narrow area. You got to focus hard on your own narrow area to make major progress there. At the same time, I would say you spend at least 10%, maybe more, of your time looking very broadly and watching for unexpected opportunities in terms of tools as well as possible directions to move. Thank you.